My wife and I are both 49 years old, and we reside in South America. Recently, I've been searching online for a platform to express my frustration, particularly among people who have gone through similar experiences to mine. The reason for this is that I've just discovered that my wife, whom I've been married to for 28 years, was having an affair with a 24-year-old. I can't help but wonder how common this situation is because, had it not been for my neighbor confiding in me, I might never have known, and her affair might have continued unnoticed. We have a 19-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both of whom are in college and living away from home. Our residence is situated in an affluent area. While I wouldn't describe myself as wealthy, I do come from a background of financial comfort. I hold down a modest job, and the same goes for my wife. She works as a manager at a textile company, overseeing a team, most of whom are in their 20s. Everything changed dramatically for me 2 weeks ago. It was a Friday, and I had just pulled into my driveway after work when my next-door neighbor approached me. He invited me to his house to watch a soccer game the following day, explaining that he had something important to discuss with me. I found this quite unusual since we weren't particularly close friends. We had hung out a couple of times during neighborhood events, exchanged greetings, and engaged in small talk when our paths crossed. He's around my age, but his kids are much younger than mine. He's one of those peculiar guys who jog around every morning as if they're training for a marathon. My wife and I used to tease him because he seemed to have an outfit for every occasion. One day he'd be running in matching attire, and the next day he'd be all decked out in his cyclist gear, pedaling away as if he were preparing for the Tour de France. I was a bit apprehensive because I wasn't sure what he had in mind. I assumed he might be trying to sell me something since I knew he worked in sales. Or perhaps he had some investment he wanted to discuss with me. So the following day, a Saturday when I usually had little to do in the evenings except exercise when I felt motivated, I decided to take him up on his offer. He welcomed me into his home, and we settled down to watch a European Premier League game, which wasn't something I typically followed. I took a seat on his couch, and he had a beer ready for me. It was just the two of us since his wife and kids were not at home. After a few minutes into the game, he shifted the conversation and mentioned that he wanted to share something with me that might upset me, but he believed, as a man, he had a responsibility to inform me. I was thinking, here comes the sales pitch. But then he showed me a series of startling photos on his phone. These pictures featured my wife and a young man walking hand in hand at a shopping mall. He displayed 5 pictures from various angles, explaining that he had taken them 3 weeks ago while he was shopping with his own kids. Initially, he hesitated to share them with me for 3 reasons. 1, we weren't close. 2, he thought it wasn't his business. And 3, he wasn't aware of the nature of my relationship with my wife. However, as time passed, he felt compelled to share this unsettling information with me. It became increasingly difficult for him to greet me, knowing that my wife might be having an affair with another man. Initially, I experienced a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, embarrassment, and then anger towards my neighbor. I thought he might be playing a prank on me, but it quickly became apparent that he was dead serious, and the person in the pictures was unmistakably my wife. I must have stared at those images for minutes, desperately searching for some explanation to shield myself from the shame and to uphold a facade of masculinity in front of my neighbor. But my emotional mask crumbled. I couldn't restrain myself. The evidence was crystal clear. My wife was indeed having an affair with a younger man. I didn't want to accept it. I tried to convince myself there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Up to that point, I hadn't picked up on any signs that my wife might have been cheating. Although cheating doesn't seem to capture the depth of this betrayal. Yet, the evidence spoke loudly and clearly. I broke down and cried in my neighbor's house, right in front of him. It was incredibly embarrassing in hindsight. I was still at my neighbor's place when my wife returned home. I wasn't sure where she had gone that Saturday evening, but I recalled her telling me she was going out to see some friends, a lie I now knew to be false. My neighbor forwarded the incriminating pictures to my phone, and as I was preparing to leave his house, he insisted on accompanying me back to my house to ensure I didn't do anything I might regret. I initially objected, but he trailed me nonetheless. In hindsight, he likely wanted to ensure I didn't take any rash actions or confront her in a way that could escalate the situation, given my visible anger. I left my neighbor's house with him following closely, my sole focus being on the impending confrontation with my wife. She was in the kitchen when I entered through the garage door. I called her name and showed her the pictures on my phone, demanding to know who the man was that she was holding hands with. She appeared shocked, her gaze darting between me and the neighbor standing behind me, who inquired about what was happening. I insisted she answer the question forcefully. I'd never been offensive to my wife before, but I couldn't say that it didn't cross my mind at that moment. She couldn't deny the pictures. It was impossible, as the images clearly depicted her. I held the phone just inches from her face and repeatedly pressed her to identify the person she was holding hands with. My intensity must have been overwhelming because my neighbor attempted to restrain me. After some hesitation, she attempted to explain herself, stating that it was a 24-year-old subordinate who worked under her. She expressed remorse for everything, but I didn't want to hear it. I instructed her to pack a bag and leave my house. That all occurred a few days ago, and I haven't seen her since that day. However, my neighbor visits occasionally to check on me. I'm typically an introvert and value my privacy. Initially, I didn't appreciate his interference, but without him, I would have been completely unaware, and my unfaithful wife might have continued her affair to this day. For that, I can't express how grateful I am to him. I prefer not to have many friends, but I do have a therapist with whom I share my personal matters. Our children are still in the dark about all of this. I haven't yet been to see my therapist. These days, I only leave the house to go to work. It's been 2 weeks since I've had a proper meal or a restful night's sleep. I spend most of my day drowning my sorrows in alcohol and shedding tears. What should I do? Should I seek a divorce? Should I attempt to salvage my marriage? Should I reach out to my wife? The pain is still unbearable, worse than anything I've ever experienced, but it's somewhat comforting to know there are people here who've gone through similar situations. I understand that I shouldn't be drinking, but sometimes it seems like the only way to numb the pain. My wife texts and calls me almost every day at the same time, but I haven't mustered the courage to answer or read what she has to say. I'm uncertain if I'm ready to hear her side of the story. Currently, she's staying at her parents' house. Our children reside in another state. I haven't heard from them since before I learned about the affair, and it seems my wife hasn't contacted them either. I've reached out to my family and informed them of what transpired. My neighbor invited me for a run this morning, which helped alleviate some stress. I now consider him a friend. There's a strong sense of familiarity between us, almost as if I've known him for years. I'm also scheduled to see my therapist tomorrow. I've been jogging with my neighbor as much as possible. During our runs, he avoids discussing my wife, which is really helping me divert my thoughts. However, it's challenging not to think about it, mostly because I'm torn inside. Part of me wants to attempt reconciliation, but I'm unsure if my wife is even the same person I married anymore. It still feels incredibly surreal. I never imagined I'd need to consult an attorney or worry about STDs from my wife. I wanted to provide a little update on where I stand this morning. I shared what happened with my family the morning after I discovered it. My parents are heartbroken. I've gone through the messages my wife has sent since D-Day. They all express her love for me, apologies for her actions, and pleas for me to take her back. I'm still unsure about it all. If she truly means those words, why did she betray me like she did? My children are still unaware, but they'll be home in a few days as they finish college for the semester. I'm uncertain about how to break the news to them. Today, I have a therapy appointment, and I'm planning to schedule a doctor's visit and consult a divorce lawyer. I'm not certain if divorce is what I want, but I suppose it doesn't hurt to have it considered for the future. I returned from my therapist's appointment. Things remain confusing, but he and this community have guided me in the direction I should take now. While my therapist lacks experience with cheating trauma, he has referred me to someone who does. I'll schedule an appointment with them. He's given me some advice on the next steps, encouraging me to give up drinking, start exercising, and take my time before confronting my wayward wife in person. It's important to ensure I'm emotionally prepared to be in the same environment as she is. Now, addressing some questions I've received. My wife's affair partner is not married. He began working with her last year. He's 24, just a bit older than our daughter. My neighbor caught them holding hands at the mall one day and took some pictures. This morning, I sent her a text outlining my expectations. While I'm still unsure about the course of action I want to take, I made it clear that certain conditions must be met for reconciliation to even be considered. I mentioned that both of us should get tested for STDs. She needs to end her relationship with her affair partner and cease all contact, and she must disclose all the details of their actions together. As of now, I haven't received a response from her. Currently, I'm contemplating whether to confront my wife in person. She's been staying at her parents' house. My wife has responded to my text with all those demands, agreeing to the written timeline, granting access to her devices and social media, ending contact with her affair partner, undergoing an STD screening, and quitting her job. I still intend to consult with a few attorneys just in case. Her parents are already aware of the situation. They found out on the same day I did. She's residing at their place. What I'm uncertain about is whether to verify her written timeline with a polygraph test. I've heard that these tests are often unreliable, and I'm not even sure where to find one in my area. Yesterday marked the first time I saw my wife in person since D-Day. After returning from work, my brother and I visited her parents' house, where she's still staying. It wasn't easy being around her, but following this community's advice, I realized that certain things needed to be discussed and established in person, rather than through text and phone calls. Upon seeing me, her immediate reaction was to burst into tears and attempt to hug me. I promptly halted that and conveyed that physical contact with her is the last thing I desire right now. She appeared hurt by my response. She repeatedly expressed remorse for her mistake, professed her love for me, and insisted that her involvement with her affair partner was just an act. I confronted her about her excuses and made it clear that I didn't want to hear them. I informed her that I'll be consulting a divorce attorney next week to explore my options. I reiterated the steps she needs to take if I am to consider reconciliation with her. I had her send a no-contact message to her affair partner right in front of me and disclose all her social media passwords. She also handed her phone over to me, allowing me to take screenshots of all the texts she exchanged with her affair partner and to check for deleted messages. Being around her was incredibly difficult. Every time she spoke, I felt an urge to yell at her. Now, regarding my own healing process, I've given up drinking and started exercising. My neighbor and I go running in the morning. I've been reading as much as I can get my hands on. While food is still unappealing, I've started eating more than I did last week. She has already resigned from her job, showing me her resignation letter. I even called her workplace to verify her claim. However, she'll still need to work there for another month. Update. My wayward wife came by and handed me her written timeline of events from the day she met her affair partner. I haven't had the time to thoroughly read it. I've just skimmed through it briefly. Honestly, I need to muster the courage to read what she has written. Just reading the first few pages filled my mind with disturbing images of them together. I found a place nearby where we can arrange the polygraph test. I plan to set a date for both of us to go and confront her with the timeline. If she passes the test, I'm considering allowing her to return to the house, but not to sleep in the same room as me. I'd still like to give it a few months to assess what I want to do and observe her actions that might influence my thoughts on reconciliation. I've gone through her phone messages and social media, which was also quite challenging and made me feel physically sick. I noticed that she sent a no-contact message to her affair partner on D-Day in addition to the one I had her send yesterday, so yesterday's message was a reinforcement. I also used a few programs to check for deleted messages, but I didn't find any. However, since I'm not tech-savvy, I plan to ask her during the polygraph test if she deleted any. My wayward wife and I got tested for STDs, and the results came back negative. Right now, I feel like an emotional roller coaster, bouncing from one emotion to the next. One minute I'm a sobbing mess, the next I'm shaking with anger, and then I'm trying to go about my day as if nothing happened. If I don't have anything to occupy my mind, it gets flooded with disturbing images of them being together. An empty mind is the devil's workshop. A month ago, I would have confidently stated that my wife could never deceive me. However, in light of recent events, I've come to realize that cheaters do indeed lie. I used to unquestionably trust everything she said, but now I'm not as certain. I've been going through the timeline, and it's been emotionally challenging. I asked her to be completely open about everything. Her emotions, their flirting, the first kiss, and the details of their encounters. She didn't hold back, and I've had to take frequent breaks. I've only reached the halfway point, and there's still so much to go through. My wife has explained to her affair partner why she's quitting, and it turns out he's lost his job. Today marks 3 weeks since D-Day. I've consulted with a few divorce attorneys to understand my options in case I decide on a divorce. In my country, if infidelity is the grounds for divorce, the cheating spouse forfeits the right to alimony. So that shouldn't be a significant concern. The way a couple's assets are divided depends on their marriage contract. My wife and I have a full separation of goods agreement, meaning everything we own is either mine or hers. If we do get divorced, the division of assets is straightforward. The house is registered in my name, so she wouldn't have a claim to it. There are various paths a divorce could take, and the timeline will depend on how my wayward wife responds. It could range from a week to 2 years. In addition to divorce, I have the option to sue my wayward wife and her affair partner for emotional distress. I'm still unsure about which path to choose, but at least I'm aware of my options now. Regarding everything else happening, my daughter is returning home today. She's still unaware of her mother's affair, but I've already texted her to let her know that her mother is staying at her grandparents' house. I mentioned that something has happened and that I'd like to discuss it with her in person. The past 2 days have been the most challenging since D-Day. Both my daughter and son now know about their mother's affair. My daughter, being the first to return from college, attempted to contact her mother, but apparently she wouldn't reveal anything except that she had done something terrible. When my daughter arrived, I sat down with her and recounted everything I knew. I told her about her mother's affair with a subordinate who's young enough to be her son, and how our neighbor captured them on camera holding hands. She was just as shocked as I was on the day I found out. We embraced and cried together. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I admitted I didn't have a clear plan yet. I mentioned speaking with a divorce attorney, but emphasized that I'm still trying to figure out the next steps. My son returned home yesterday, and I think he took the news even harder than his sister did. I sat down with him and explained everything just as I did with his sister. He erupted in anger, shouting and using derogatory terms to describe his mother. That hurt more than I expected. I don't want my children to lose their mother, despite what she's done. I told him he had every right to be angry with her, but that I didn't want him to refer to her in such a disrespectful way ever again. As of today, both of them are staying home with me and helping out around the house. My wife has attempted to reach them, but they've been ignoring her calls, and she hasn't pushed the matter further. Update. I deeply want my family to be whole again. The past month has unquestionably been the worst of my life, but I've discovered incredible support here. Every morning before work, I've been going out to jog in my neighborhood. I've also started eating full meals again and seeing my new therapist. Although I miss my old therapist and the connection we had, the new therapist has been tremendously helpful in navigating my emotions. My daughter went to visit her mother. Despite her anger, she has expressed her desire to maintain contact with her. My son appears to have been the most deeply affected. He's very upset that I haven't filed for divorce yet, and has harshly criticized his mother. He's even made some hurtful comments like wishing she would pass. I've told him not to use derogatory language even though she's done a terrible thing. She's still his mom. It's challenging to accept that this new behavior is a result of the shock from the discovery and not something that was already there. I never imagined my son would become this kind of person. My son is legally an adult now, and I can't force him to do anything. However, I plan to encourage him to seek individual counseling alongside me and his sister. I'll also assert myself when I believe he's being disrespectful to me or his mother. Tomorrow, I'll visit her and have her read the timeline she's written in front of me. I also have a polygraph test scheduled for next Saturday. I'm still considering my options, and I believe these next 2 steps can help me make a decision. In her timeline, she describes how he gave her attention, and she found it exciting. I haven't had a proper discussion with my wife to understand exactly what was going through her mind beyond what she's written down. But if I take her at her word, her affair partner made her feel youthful, and having a forbidden affair aroused her. Seeing her wasn't the most challenging part. I've seen her a few times since D-Day. What was tough was sitting through her reading the timeline. There were moments when I cried, and others when I was filled with anger. I had to ask her to stop a few times because it was getting too overwhelming, and I needed a few minutes to process. She cried throughout the whole process, but I'm uncertain about the sincerity of those tears. She didn't object or try to skip anything. She read through the entire thing. Whenever I asked for more details, she provided them. It took us about 4 hours to get through it. By the end, I was emotionally drained, and it seemed like she was too. I told her that we would revisit these questions during the polygraph test. Again, she didn't object. It appears that she's being genuine, but I'm uncertain about whether to believe her or not. I'm still attending therapy and going running every morning. Sometimes it's challenging to keep disturbing images and dark thoughts at bay, but I'm in a much better place now than I was in the days following D-Day. I'm still undecided about what to do going forward. My wife has started seeing a therapist, and we have the polygraph test tomorrow, so maybe I'll be able to make my decision then. I've prepared a few questions that I want to ask her tomorrow, such as, have you been completely honest with me since I found out about your affair? Is the timeline you've written a comprehensive and truthful account of events? Have you had any other affairs during our marriage? Did you delete any emails or messages on your phone and social media between you and your AP that I haven't seen? Update. I brought my wife back from her parents' house on Saturday. We didn't chat much during the drive, but her body language suggested she was uncomfortable. When we arrived and waited for the examiner, she asked if I was certain about going through with this. I confirmed. She was connected to the machine for about 20 minutes and responded with no to all my questions. Afterward, I drove her back home and left her at her parents' place once more. We didn't converse much on the way back either. I was too fatigued to revisit our earlier discussion about her timeline. She did inquire about my intentions, and I honestly admitted I hadn't decided yet. The results came in on Monday. Evidently, she was telling the truth. I thought this might help me make up my mind, but I'm still uncertain. I can't decide whether to give our marriage another shot or proceed with the divorce. I long for our old life, but she hurt me deeply. She is attending therapy. Our daughter visited her a couple of times, and she has seen her therapist too. I'm unsure if they specialize in infidelity. She did indeed respond yes to the first two questions. My son is struggling with his feelings towards his mom, and it's causing concern. He's angry with me for not divorcing his mom, which is unusual, especially considering how close they were before all this. I'm uncertain if infidelity has affected his personal relationships or if other cultural and environmental factors are at play. Every time I've tried to discuss his reaction, he's shut me out. He refuses to listen, talk about his feelings, or consider therapy to address his pain. Reader comment. To be honest, he views your inability to take action as a sign of weakness. Maybe he anticipates you should respond like a man who won't stand for his wife being used like a plaything by a younger guy. The reality is this young guy got to enjoy your wife without having to deal with the baggage of a long-term marriage. Based on what I know about affairs, he likely had his way with her. Your son wants to witness his dad taking clear-cut action. It's as simple as that. OP reply. I'd argue that having my wife leave our home and consulting a divorce attorney was a decisive move. What follows isn't up to him to decide. I will ultimately make that choice. He doesn't get to dictate what's the best path forward for my life. I'm the only one who can determine the most suitable course of action moving forward. Reader comment. But spending half an hour on a park bench with a cup of coffee, just to assess any progress, might help you clarify your thoughts. OP reply, I believe I can do that. Thanks for the suggestion. It's been nearly a month since my last update here, and my relationship is still struggling. She has done everything I've asked, but I can't shake the thought of her deceiving me and being close with another man. Part of me desires reconciliation, but another part recognizes that I'll never fully recover from her infidelity. I followed a reader's advice and began having weekly meetings with her, mostly in public places like parks and restaurants. Both my kids have returned to college and are no longer at home. My daughter is trying to mend her relationship with her mother, while my son wants nothing to do with her. I've been meeting with my wife every week to monitor her progress. She continues to attend therapy to understand the reasons behind her actions. She claims she doesn't know why she did it, but I'm skeptical. After all, she spent 9 months in an affair, which is a long time to be uncertain about your motives. A somewhat positive surprise is that her therapist recommended she read Not Just Friends by Shirley Glass. We discussed the book and she appears to be making progress, but time will tell. She did resign from her job, and her affair partner lost his job when she disclosed the reason for her departure. I've checked her phone and email a few times. Her affair partner is still blocked, and her recent messages to him were about maintaining no contact. Whenever we've met over the past month to discuss the situation and her actions, she's claimed to be genuinely remorseful. However, I can't help but wonder if she's only remorseful because she got caught. She mentioned attending individual counseling to understand why she allowed herself to engage in the affair. She also cut ties with former friends who were apparently enabling her behavior. a story in itself. She's offered me an open channel to vent or ask questions if I feel the need. During our conversations, there were moments when I became triggered and lashed out at her. Initially, I think she was surprised by my reactions, and she tried to backtrack on the statements that triggered me. But now, when it occurs, she simply listens and lets me express my feelings. We delved into why she had the affair and her emotions during it. She mentioned justifying it as a way to find the closeness she wasn't getting at home. Now she realizes it happened because she wasn't putting effort into our relationship. In the months leading up to her affair, she began to focus heavily on her job. The limited free time she had was mostly spent with friends, leaving little time for us to be together. She acknowledges that during that period, she became self-absorbed and wrongly perceived the decrease in closeness between us as my fault. She's apologized and accepts full responsibility for her choices. She also admitted that even if there were issues in our relationship, she should have communicated with me rather than seeking satisfaction outside of our marriage. I'm not entirely sure how to interpret all of this at the moment. I guess I just wanted to share it with others for now. Reader comment. Did she explain why she was willing to remain in a marriage lacking closeness, as most spouses wouldn't accept that? Or did she discuss how she managed to feel no guilt during the affair? Has she given any insight into why the vows we made when we got married seemed unimportant to her? OP reply. According to her, it didn't happen suddenly. Rather, it built up over several frustrating months. She claims to have been aware of her affair partner's attraction to her for quite some time. He had made flirtatious comments in the past, and due to mounting frustration, she eventually started responding to them. In the beginning, she justified it as just flirting and believed it wouldn't progress further. But when it did, she felt guilty. However, she rationalized it by saying she was finding fulfillment elsewhere. And I should have noticed something was wrong when our intimacy declined without her having to spell it out. During that period, she thought I was the source of her frustration, leading to bitterness. She now acknowledges how twisted her rationalizations were, recognizing her own selfishness and reluctance to voice her concerns earlier. She has repeatedly offered her support, telling me I can talk to her whenever I need. I've sat down with her multiple times to express my feelings about discovering the affair, the 2 months we spent apart, and my thoughts about any potential future with her. On each occasion, she patiently listened and apologized at the end. I'm not entirely sure if there's much more she could do that I'd be receptive to right now. Our weekly meetings only seem to confirm that I may never fully get past it. Nonetheless, we plan to continue to see if time can heal these wounds. My main issue is struggling to trust her, and it's challenging to fall asleep knowing that my wife, who slept next to me, deceived me for 9 months. I suppose I'm holding on because I'm nostalgic for how my family used to be, and I want to ensure I've given reconciliation a fair chance. Reader comment, that she prioritized her attraction to a younger man over her marriage vows. OP reply, it's interesting. Those were almost the exact words she used when explaining her thought process that led to cheating. I may not be doing a great job of conveying our conversations. I tend to be concise when discussing upsetting topics or ones with many details. Of course, I can only recount what she told me, and there's still the possibility that she might be lying. She acknowledges that her choice to cheat was entirely her own. What she described as a lack of a love connection was a situation she caused. She was spending a lot of time at work and hanging out with friends. The decrease in closeness, which she used to justify her affair, was a result of her not spending much time at home. She now recognizes it was foolish to blame me for the reduced closeness when she wasn't putting in time with me. These are her words, not mine. Reader comment. Did she genuinely say that while she was involved in the affair and rejecting your advances, she felt bitter toward you because you didn't notice the decline in closeness? OP reply. No, she didn't say that. She mentioned feeling bitter before the affair. Reader comment. I'm curious if she has ever talked to you about her perception of your emotions when you discovered her affair, or what it was like for you when she was away. Can she convey that she understands the pain she caused you? OP reply. She did attempt to start such a conversation. She began by sharing how it pained her to witness my reaction when she read the timeline, and she acknowledged that whatever suffering she endured while we were apart couldn't compare to the pain I must have felt. I ended that discussion before it could go further because I didn't want to discuss my emotions. Reader comment. She knew she could sleep with you whenever she wanted. You were initiating. Nothing was lacking. OP reply. Once again, it seems like I'm not explaining things adequately. She understands that nothing was lacking on my part. She used this as a justification for her affair at the time, but she knows that her decision to cheat was her own failing. Reader comment. She seems to be implying that her emotions, which are subjective and not easily proven, were the cause of her affair. I call nonsense. OP reply, I'm not entirely sure I grasp this statement. If not for her emotions, what other reason would there be for her to cheat? Update. It has been 3 months since the affair, and she is still residing with her parents. I continue to run with my neighbor in the mornings and maintain a healthy diet. Mentally and physically, I feel better than I did before D-Day. I've been delving into self-improvement books and other materials to help me make a final decision about my marriage. She recently secured a new job at a company not far from the house we used to share, which suggests she may be anticipating moving back in soon. Our weekly meetings have been going well for her, but not for me. We've been meeting at various locations like parks and restaurants. She's followed all my requests, though at times I worry I'm giving her false hope. I'm genuinely attempting to rebuild trust, but it's proven more challenging than I expected. Forgiving her has been a struggle, and I thought it would improve with time. Yesterday marked our final meeting, a decision I hadn't shared with her until that moment. Prior to the meeting, I realized I couldn't continue like this. I needed to free myself from the constant reminder that she might cheat again if I let her back in. She broke my trust and confidence, and no matter how many meetings we had, I couldn't overcome that feeling. It seemed like our relationship had reached its end. We chose a secluded park for our meeting because I knew she might cry, beg, and potentially cause a scene, and I wanted to avoid drawing attention. Emotionally, I'm drained and can't continue these meetings. After breaking the news, as expected, she started crying and pleading. I explained how difficult this decision had been, and despite her efforts to regain my trust, I would alternate between feeling fine on my own and then furious at her for deceiving me for 9 months. I emphasized that, for both our sakes, we needed to go separate ways. I would maintain a friendly relationship because she's the mother of my children, but I couldn't trust her or share my bed with her again. I suggested we focus on rebuilding her relationship with my son, but I wouldn't force him. Despite her actions, her infidelity is an issue between her and me. My wife continued to cry, expressing her determination to win me back, but she respected my decision. I reached out to my lawyer today to finalize the divorce petition so I can serve it to her. Hey everyone, I'm an old guy, turning 60 this year. My first grandkid was born 3 years back. Let me tell you something. I've met all kinds of people from around the world. I've dealt with my fair share of crazy folks and oddballs too. But out of all of them, there's one person who stands out as the biggest nutcase, and that's none other than my wife. Maybe it's because she's a good 10 years younger than me. She's really into herself. She usually goes for what's easiest for her, even if it messes with others. And not only that, when she doesn't get what she wants, she's super forceful and pushy, no matter how much we discuss it. Her ways never changed. So in the end, I just gave up and tried not to let it bug me. But I couldn't ignore what she recently did. It was beyond forgiveness, and it shook me to the core. Let's go back 3 years. My son finished up at a military academy. Right after, he got hitched and soon became a dad. One day he came to our place with his son and wife. He had a favor to ask my wife. He explained that his paycheck alone couldn't handle the family expenses, so they decided his wife needed to start working too. He wondered if my wife could babysit his kid during the week while they were at their jobs. He mentioned it would only be until the kid was ready for preschool. He offered us $1,000 a month if my wife said yes. I wasn't keen on my wife looking after my grandson. She's not really one to care about others. They probably didn't realize what a bad idea it was then. Anyway, my wife agreed to watch their son. I was about to retire, so I'd be home more often. I could chip in sometimes instead of my wife. We told our son we'd take care of our grandkid. I was anxious for the times when I couldn't be there to watch him. My wife was the last person who should handle babysitting. Before long, my son's family moved into a house near ours. When my daughter-in-law's maternity leave was up, she went back to work, and we started watching our grandson. He was a bit over a year old and just figuring out how to walk. He was the cutest kid I've ever seen. It took me back to when my son was that age. They looked so alike. It made me all nostalgic to see him and remember those times. I had some stuff to do later that day, but I wanted to hang out with my grandson for around an hour before I had to head out. I was playing pretend chase with him around the house to help him practice walking. We had fun with all his favorite toys. That's when I heard the front door open. I walked over to see who it was, but it wasn't someone arriving. Turns out, it was my wife leaving. I figured she might be taking out the trash or something, but after a minute or two, she didn't return inside. Time passed. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even half an hour, and still no sign of her in the house. I gave her a call to see what she was up to. I asked where she was and mentioned that I had to leave soon. "Why aren't you back yet?" I inquired. She replied that she had stepped out to take care of something and assured me she'd be back shortly. She asked me to look after Robbie a bit longer. I told her firmly, "You really should try to come back as soon as possible. I need to hit the bank before it gets crowded and I've got lunch plans with a friend." So I waited and waited. But she didn't return. And she wasn't answering her phone either. I had already told her when I needed to meet my friend, but she still wasn't back. If I waited much longer, I was going to be late. Reluctantly, I gave my friend I was supposed to meet a call. I said, "Hey Billy, listen up. I'm kinda stuck at home right now watching my grandson." My wife was supposed to be back by now, but she's still not here, and she's not answering her phone. "I'm really sorry, but I think we'll need to change our plans." My friend said he got it and that it's all good. No need to stress about it. Just give me a heads up when you're available and we can reschedule. I really didn't like calling off our hangout at the last moment. It kinda makes me look bad, even though it's really my wife's fault. I was pretty upset with her for taking so long to come back. Finally, around 3 o'clock, she showed up at the house. I was pretty mad when I asked, "Where were you?" Thanks to you, I had to bail on my friend. She didn't seem bothered at all. She said, "Well, I wanted to get back sooner, but a few things came up and I lost track of time." She didn't even say sorry, acting like it was no big deal. I shot back, "You promised you'd look after Robbie. That's what you should have done. You have a responsibility now that you can't just ignore. You're not looking after someone's pet. You're looking after your own grandkid." She rolled her eyes and sat down next to little Robbie. Before long, my daughter-in-law came to pick up her son. And of course, my wife acted like she had been watching him all day and told her how well-behaved he'd been. Naturally, my daughter-in-law believed her. She didn't have any reason not to do it. I wanted to speak out, but I held back. What I wanted to say was she shouldn't get any credit because she didn't really do anything. It was me who looked after Robbie from morning till 3 o'clock, while she was out shopping or doing who knows what all day. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I kept quiet. It didn't take long for my suspicions to be proven right. My wife had no intention of watching her grandson in the morning when my daughter-in-law dropped off Robbie. She would be there to welcome her and take him inside. That was pretty much the only time she spent with Robbie during the day. Once she put him in the living room with me, she'd vanish and only return a few minutes before Robbie was supposed to be picked up. I'd call her every time she left the house, and she'd say the same thing. "I won't be gone for long." But obviously, that was a lie. She was gone almost the entire time Robbie was at our place. I scolded her and questioned, "Why did you agree to watch him if you weren't going to actually do it?" She shot back, "I never said I would. I've got my own stuff to take care of. He's your responsibility." She gave me attitude, saying, "You're a parent. How could you say something so cruel? You're basically ditching your own grandkid." She acted like all I had to do was play with him and put him down for a nap. She talked about responsibility, but that's her duty as a grandfather too. It's like the minimum she can do. If she can't handle that, maybe she shouldn't even be around him. I shouted, "You agreed to this. You're the reason he's here now. How can you put the blame on me?" My wife fired back, "I thought it was clear I was speaking for both of us. Isn't it strange that you're acting like it's only my job? We're both supposed to look after our grandson. It's crazy to say I should be the sole caretaker." Things were getting pretty heated. It was obvious she wasn't about to change her stance, and we couldn't take back her offer to watch him. I never imagined my retirement would turn out like this. I had plans to enjoy my time in my own way, not be stuck as a babysitter. Her arguments didn't even make sense. She kept going on about our shared responsibility when in reality, I was the only one actually watching him. She claimed she was busy throughout the day, always running errands, and then needing to make dinner once she got back. She probably spent maybe 10 minutes actually keeping an eye on him, and if that wasn't enough, she'd keep most of the money for herself. My daughter-in-law was paying her to watch Robbie, but she'd take 80% of it and toss me the remaining 20%. In reality, I was basically the one taking care of Robbie all on my own. How did she come to think she deserved nearly all that cash? When I confronted her about taking such a big portion of the money, she responded with, "Obviously I deserve more than you. I'm the one cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry. It's only fair I get a bigger cut. But I'm being nice and letting you have some." I scolded her, saying, "You're using my retirement money for those things. Why should you also get extra money?" She acted all high and mighty, saying, "I'm doing more now that Robbie's here. I should be compensated for the work I'm putting in. The retirement money is a separate matter." It felt like I was trying to talk to a brick wall. No matter what I said or how logical my argument was, it was like talking into thin air. I was getting seriously worked up. At my age, I shouldn't have to argue about absurd stuff like this. Eventually, I just gave up. But that wasn't the end of her antics. When the weather got better, I didn't want to stay cooped up inside all day with Robbie. We'd hold hands and go for walks. He really enjoyed the park, so we went there often too. I really enjoyed hanging out with him at the park, especially when we were on the playground. One day while I was at the park, I met an older lady who was there too. She was looking after her grandkid just like me. She introduced herself as Evelyn. Actually, I shouldn't call her older, since she was only a couple years older than me. The main giveaway that she was a grandma was that she had her granddaughter with her. She looked surprisingly great for her age. You'd never guess she was older than me. It was quite a coincidence. We both happened to be at the same park with our grandkids when we crossed paths. We got to chatting about taking care of our grandkids, their ages, what we fed them, what games we played. We ended up really hitting it off. Robbie had a blast at the park with the other kids. He enjoyed being with me, but he definitely liked hanging around kids his age too, especially Evelyn's granddaughter. My new friend and I swapped phone numbers. We'd always get in touch before heading to the park with our grandkids. One day, I got a call from Evelyn. She told me that the library where she volunteers was organizing a kids class. She said it was all about sensory development, aimed at sharpening the 5 senses of young children. She asked if I wanted to bring Robbie along. She mentioned she was going with her granddaughter. I told her I'd be excited to join in. And you know what? It turned out to be a blast. There were loads of 3D puzzles and interactive stuff for the kids. They mixed learning and fun really well. Our grandkids had a blast. This kind of thing wasn't around back when my son was a kid. I'm amazed at how much the world has changed to help kids develop. I let Evelyn know how much I enjoyed the class. I asked, "Is this a one-time deal, or do they do this often?" I mentioned that I'd love to get Robbie into more of these activities. She filled me in that the library runs these classes every week, so we both got our grandkids signed up for the weekly sessions. I started taking Robbie there every Wednesday. On the other days, he and I would still hit the park. In the beginning, Evelyn and I had signed up for different class days, but the library's parking was always packed, and finding a spot was the hassle. I offered to drive Evelyn and her granddaughter, so she switched to the same day as Robbie's class. It actually worked out nicely, because her place was on the way to the library. She thanked me by baking cookies and giving Robbie cute little treats. She even brought out a whole apple pie once. She knitted him a pair of mittens that matched the ones she made for her granddaughter. Things were going awesome for about 6 months. Things were good until my wife got involved. One day when I was home with Robbie, my wife went out like usual. But this time she didn't go shopping. She went over to Evelyn's place. She started accusing her of having an affair with me. She caused a huge scene, shouting about how Evelyn was trying to ruin our marriage and bring disgrace to her. I think my wife picked up on the fact that Evelyn and I were spending a lot of time at the park together, so she jumped to the conclusion that we were having an affair. Evelyn's husband heard the noise and came outside. My wife explained to him how Evelyn and I were spending so much time together and how she believed we were having an affair. My wife demanded he keep a close watch on her from then on. She even started blaming him for what she thought was happening. She was pointing fingers at him, saying, "This is your fault. You should have realized what was going on. You have no clue what your own wife does once she's out of the house. How could you be so clueless?" But really, she was the one who had no clue. How could she just jump to conclusions without knowing anything? Only someone acting crazy would go to someone's house and accuse them of cheating without any evidence. She was screaming so loudly that the whole neighborhood probably heard. I felt terrible for Evelyn knowing her through all this. She usually led a quiet life. But that day was different. Her husband finally got a word in and told my wife that Evelyn was looking after their granddaughter when she left the house. But my wife wasn't buying it. Her outburst continued into the next day. That's when Evelyn called me up. "Fill me in on what happened. What's up with your wife? She came over here and created a big scene. What did you say to her? You must have said something that set her off and made her angry enough to come down to my place and yell at me." Evelyn gave me the whole story of what went down. I was horrified. I had no clue my wife had done something like that. I told Evelyn just that, and that I had no understanding of what was going on in her mind. I apologized repeatedly. I felt awful. I checked if things were okay with her husband. I suggested I'd go straighten things out and talk to my wife if it would help. Evelyn responded, "I don't think that's a good idea. If your wife discovers you came here, she'll go even crazier. It's probably best if we stop communicating. Please erase my number. I'm going to do the same. Let's just act like we don't know each other. If we bump into each other at the park, let's treat it like a chance encounter. At my age, I never imagined I'd have someone scream at me like that." The whole neighborhood could hear it. It was truly embarrassing. I had zero clue about what was going on in my wife's mind. I apologized sincerely one last time to Evelyn and then hung up the phone. She was such a kind lady. We were both dealing with the same situation, watching our grandkids. But we became real friends beyond that. Leave it to my wife to mess up something like that, even for herself. This was a new low. The chaos wasn't only happening for Evelyn and her family. My wife returned from her visit to Evelyn's just as my daughter-in-law was arriving to pick up Robbie. She looked frantic and ordered my daughter-in-law, "Jimmy, come here right now, we need to talk." My son came over to the house and my wife had all of us sit down at the kitchen table for a talk. At this point, I had no idea what she had done or where she had been. This was before I spoke with Evelyn on the phone. I sat there and listened as my wife yelled, "You're useless! Your father is having an affair!" We were all taken aback, staring at her. That was quite an audacious accusation. We were all shocked and bewildered. My daughter-in-law interrupted, saying, "Mom, what are you talking about?" My wife then pulled out a picture of Evelyn and me at the park. Who knows when she took it? It was a photo of us sitting on a bench together. And not just that, she even had pictures of her and me together in the car. My son and daughter-in-law gazed at the photos. My wife confidently exclaimed as she showed her evidence, "Check this out. Your deadbeat father is spending all his time with some random woman. Look here. Here he is getting a cake from her. She was even cooking dinner for him. Look, I did my research on this woman. I followed her. She used her grandchild as an excuse to get closer to him and started going on dates with him. They were going all around town together, flaunting their affair for everyone to see. What a sad, lonely woman. Look at her. You can tell she's a no-good old hag." She tossed down another picture. "Here they are, sneaking around the library together. They used their grandchildren as a cover for their love affair." With her arms crossed, she waited for our reactions to her detective work. My son and daughter-in-law silently turned to me. I could see their eyes saying, "Dad, how could you do something like this?" It crushed me to see them look at me that way. I was being labeled as a cheating old man. Clearly it wasn't true, but somehow I couldn't find the words to protest against what she was saying. I needed to defend myself, but I was so stunned and speechless. After a few moments, I came back to my senses. An affair? How could you come up with something so absurd? She and I got to know each other at the park where our grandkids were playing together. We both attended a kids' class at the library. I drove us all there. That's why we were in the car together. I laid out my explanation and waited to see how she'd respond. As expected, my defense didn't matter at all. It was as if I was speaking a completely different language. She didn't pay attention to a single word I said. To be honest, even if she did listen, it wouldn't have made a difference. She yelled, "How could you do this to me? I work my tail off for you. Is this how you repay me for everything I do? How could you cheat on me? That woman is like the devil. She probably pushed you into this even though she knew you were married. A few cookies were all it took to lure you in. You weak-minded fool. You and her both make me sick. What else did she do? How deep does your affair go? What did you say to her? Did you promise to get a divorce so you could be with her?" She wasn't just jumping to conclusions. She was pole vaulting to them. She was going all out to uncover this imaginary affair she believed I was having. I foolishly tried to reason with her and explain that she was being completely unreasonable. She wasn't having any of my explanations. I told her, "I'm not going to sit here and let you call me a cheater and a liar. This is totally unacceptable. You're making assumptions without any proof just because we're friends. You need to stop this right now." She kept throwing out one ridiculous claim after another in a frantic way. I made one last effort to defend myself. "I'll say this one more time. Evelyn is just a friend. Nothing more." We met when Robbie and her granddaughter started playing together at the park. They became buddies. I got in touch with her when Robbie and I went to the park so he could play with his new little friend. We attended a sensory development class at the library. Both Robbie and her granddaughter enjoyed it, so we signed them up for more sessions. You saw her in the car with me because we were going to those classes together. There was nothing more to add. That was the truth, but whether my wife accepted it or not, it seemed like she wasn't listening. My wife continued to scold me. I've never heard of a cheater admitting it up front, saying, "Yes, I'm having an affair." Of course, you'd come up with a complex story. Cheaters always create stories to save themselves. And believe me, I know plenty of people who've had affairs like you. Don't pretend there was nothing going on between you two. You were hanging out every day. Do you really think I'm naive? I've seen women like her in the past. They pretend to be sweet and innocent to get close to a man, then use him for money. And you, being the gullible guy you are, fell for her tricks from day one. From now on, I'm taking charge of all the finances at home. Give me all your debit and credit cards. And don't forget the money we make from looking after Robbie. That's all going to be mine now. I told her there was no way I was agreeing to that. I had already given her access to an account, and I had put half of my retirement money in there. We had agreed that it would be our main source of funds, but we would also keep separate accounts for personal expenses. I absolutely refused to let her control my personal account. She argued, "I know that awful woman is after the money, and I don't trust you enough not to give it to her. I have to watch it to prevent that from happening. You should be grateful. I'm safeguarding our finances. Otherwise that witch would bankrupt us." She kept on and on about how things had to be done her way. No matter what I say, it's like you're not listening to the truth. It's not worth my time anymore to keep explaining the same thing over and over to you. I turned to my son and his wife. Your mother is completely out of touch with reality. You two should go. I'll handle her. That's when I realized the worst-case scenario was unfolding. It seemed like they were actually believing her. They were taking her side over mine. The whole situation left me drained and with a pounding headache. After my son's family left, the confrontation with my wife continued. How could you accuse me of that in front of them? You have no idea what you're talking about. What's gotten into you? She insisted she had all the evidence she needed. It's right here. You and her spending all your time together. It's sickening, having an affair at your age. I yelled back, I'm the one taking care of Robbie all by myself, and now on top of that, I have to deal with your false accusations. I've had enough. Starting tomorrow, you're going to watch him. No more excuses. It's time for you to step up. Of course, she refused. Do you think I'd let you off the hook like that? Absolutely not. Who knows what you'd do if I had to be home with Robbie all day? I want you at the house with Robbie. I don't trust you on your own. End of story. How low does someone have to stoop to use their own grandchild as a way to imply an affair? It's truly awful, to be honest. I never thought I'd feel this terrible, even if I were really having an affair and got caught. My life was turned upside down because of an affair that never even happened. I never thought my retirement would turn out this way. I felt like I was losing my sanity. And if you thought that was the end of it, you'd be mistaken. It was around 2 months later that things took an even more unexpected turn. What unfolded next made the chaos around the made-up affairs seem insignificant. My wife, at 50 years old, discovered she was pregnant. She found out when she was already 16 weeks along. She had noticed her periods were irregular and assumed it was due to menopause. She had a feeling that something wasn't right. She mentioned feeling sick, similar to how she felt during her pregnancy with our son many years ago. A doctor's visit confirmed her suspicion. She was pregnant. I had no clue. I didn't pick up on any signs that she might be expecting. Here's where things get tricky. We hardly spoke a couple of words to each other after she accused me of having an affair. Needless to say, our closeness came to a screeching halt after that incident. She barely acknowledged my presence. There was only one instance I can recall when she tried to be close with me, and it was completely out of the blue. She hadn't approached me that way in years. I was taken aback. I asked her what had brought this on. I couldn't resist her advances, and eventually, I succumbed to the temptation. Despite knowing I shouldn't, I gave in anyway. It turned into a night of passion that I hadn't felt with my wife for years. About a month later, my wife woke me up while I was asleep. She whispered that she was pregnant. I was utterly shocked. "Pregnant at your age?" I exclaimed. She chuckled and replied, "What do you mean by at my age? I'm not that old. Women can still have babies when they're my age. Let's not mix up our ages. I'm just 50. If I were 60 like you, it might be a different story. It's not so strange for a woman of my age to be pregnant. Haven't you remembered our passionate night together? Don't act so surprised." I was skeptical. A man my age shouldn't be so easily able to get a woman pregnant, I thought. I insisted there must be some mistake. My wife assured me that if a considerable amount of time had passed since her last encounter with a man, it was quite possible for her to become pregnant. She told me not to voice any more doubts, emphasizing that regardless of my belief, it had happened. Initially, I felt a mix of shock and disappointment. I was on the brink of becoming a father again at the age of 60. As I dwelled on the idea, I found myself getting more and more excited. My grandson was such a sweetheart, and I absolutely enjoyed playing with him. If I were to have another child of my own, I just knew they would be equally adorable. It doesn't really matter when a child comes into your life. They deserve care and love regardless. Sure, some folks might chuckle at us for having a baby at our age, but honestly, I couldn't care less. I was ready to pour all my love into this child, no matter what anyone said. Turning to my wife, I advised her, "You need to take extra good care of yourself now. Even though you're not too old to have a baby, it doesn't mean you're as young and energetic as before. Let's make sure we attend your upcoming doctor appointment together. I'm eager to see how our new little blessing is progressing." About a month later, we went to the next appointment, and according to the ultrasound, everything was going smoothly with the baby. This was actually my first time witnessing an ultrasound, and it made the whole situation feel incredibly real. Oddly, seeing our child on the screen while my wife wiped off the ultrasound gel felt both amazing and a little strange at the same time. I turned to the doctor and voiced my concerns. "I'm absolutely thrilled about this late-in-life addition to our family, but it also comes with a hint of worry. Is it safe for us to have a due date at our age? Are there any precautions we should be mindful of given our circumstances? Are there any general things we should be aware of or anticipate?" The doctor answered, "I can't provide an exact date until your next checkup, but if I were to estimate right now, I'd say sometime in the last few days of August or early September." I expressed my gratitude to the doctor and the nurses before heading back home. As soon as I returned, I marked those days the doctor mentioned on the calendar. Then, I created a comprehensive list of tasks to prepare for the baby's arrival. That's when I noticed something was amiss. It was March, and our night together had taken place a month earlier. How could her due date possibly be in August? That just doesn't add up. I brought up my concern with my wife. The doctor mentioned that the baby could arrive in August. That seems quite impossible. It's way too soon for a baby to be born. Her response was, "It's not uncommon for women my age to give birth a little earlier than the usual time frame. There's really nothing to worry about." But even then, having the baby arrive just 6 or 7 months later is still much too early. While I know that some babies are born a bit before the standard 9-month period, a 7-month birth usually indicates there were complications or an emergency situation. I can't imagine a doctor planning for a baby to come that prematurely. I went back to the doctor to discuss this. I told him that upon reflection, I was puzzled about our baby's due date being just 7 months away. I understand that my wife is older and sometimes older women give birth early, but it just seems way too quick. The doctor assured me that the baby appears to be healthy for now. Your wife is in her 16th week of pregnancy. In fact, there's even a chance the baby might come earlier if things continue progressing as they are. No need to be concerned. Then it suddenly clicked. I had a feeling something was off, and this confirmed it. My wife and I were together only a month ago. How could she be 16 weeks pregnant already? It didn't make sense. I thanked the doctor and left to head back home, lost in thought. During the drive, a heavy feeling hit me. It was as if all the energy had been drained out of me when the doctor mentioned that. Slowly, the pieces fell into place. I realized what might have happened. My wife lost her rationality when she believed she had caught me in an affair. I don't know if it was an attempt to retaliate or if she thought she was in a temporary free zone. Around the time she accused me, she might have actually engaged in an affair herself. It's like she wanted to even the score. I felt the need to confront my wife about what I had figured out. I wanted to know who the other person involved was. The following day, we were looking after our grandson. She asked me to play a song for him using my phone while we were playing together. I admitted I didn't know how to do that, so I asked her to handle it. She responded, "You're about to become a parent again and you don't know how to do something so simple. You need to catch up with the times." She shook her head, unlocked her phone, and played some cheerful children's music. I knew she would be going out soon, as was her usual routine. When she left the room, I took the opportunity to go through her phone. I checked her recent call history and made a note of the names and numbers I saw. Then, I opened her text messages. The first name that caught my attention was a man named Daniel. I scrolled through their conversation and saw a photo of the ultrasound. They had been discussing the baby quite extensively. After my wife sent the ultrasound picture, the man's response was, "Are you sure? I'm concerned about you having a baby at your age." My wife replied, "I'm fully committed to having this baby and raising it on my own. Don't worry, there's no need for concern. I've already informed my husband about everything. We can discuss the details more when we meet face to face." That was the final message she sent. I put down her phone just as she re-entered the room. I acted like everything was normal. Once she left the house, I placed Robbie in his baby carrier. I stepped out to trail my wife and find out where she was headed. Fortunately, she was walking and hadn't taken the car. She mentioned she was going to the nearby butcher shop. I observed her entering the shop from a distance. I lingered there, but she didn't emerge. I couldn't just barge in and blow my cover. I tiptoed up to the window and peeked inside. To my surprise, I didn't see anyone, despite having seen her enter. I made the decision to push open the door and enter. The bells hanging on the door jingled as I walked in. The butcher hurried out from the back, still putting on his uniform and a bit out of breath. He appeared to be in his 40s. I said to him, "I'm here to find a person, not to buy meat." My wife must have recognized my voice. I noticed her peeking her head out, seemingly from the office. We locked eyes immediately. In a panic, she hurriedly closed the door, probably hoping I hadn't noticed. Swiftly, I rushed to the door and swung it open. Inside, my wife was lying on a bed covered with a blanket. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Come out here," I insisted. The butcher raised his voice, questioning, "What's happening? Who are you?" I shot back, "I'm her husband." His eyes widened and his mouth hung open in shock. He turned to my wife and yelled, "It's your husband. You need to come out right now." Addressing my wife again, I asked, "What's happening here? Explain yourself. Why are you here?" She responded, "I came here to buy some meat and then somehow ended up in this room." I shouted, "That doesn't make sense. You need to come out and bring Robbie home immediately." Once she left the room, I turned my attention to the butcher and began to interrogate him. "What's really going on here? Don't even try to lie. I'm aware that my wife is pregnant with your child. If you don't tell me the truth, I'll call my son down here, and we'll get the answers out of you one way or another." The butcher hesitated, but eventually started explaining. It turned out my wife was a regular customer at his shop. He mentioned he had been married but got divorced not long ago. My wife had learned about his situation and had been trying to support him through it. Eventually, he started feeling a strong attraction towards her. This happened more than 2 years ago. It made sense why she was constantly leaving the house every day. Their connection deepened, and it eventually led to her becoming pregnant. He admitted he didn't plan for things to turn out this way. According to him, things spiraled out of control. He also revealed that there was another woman he was in a relationship with, someone he was considering marrying again. However, his plans changed drastically when he found out about my wife's pregnancy. Now he's uncertain about what steps to take next. I was left standing there, utterly speechless. She tried to shame me, accuse me of an affair, all the while she was the one actually cheating. A 50-year-old woman having an affair and getting pregnant? It's quite unbelievable, isn't it? And to top it off, it was with a 40-year-old divorced butcher. My wife must have enjoyed the attention from a much younger man, even if he wasn't only interested in her. Unfortunately for both of them, their secret world came crashing down. It's something I never would have imagined in a million years. I waited outside my house until my daughter-in-law finished her work and arrived to pick up Robbie. When she got there, I welcomed her inside the house. My wife's mood shifted as soon as she spotted us entering the house. I proceeded to share everything with my daughter-in-law. I recounted the entire story the butcher had told me, the affair, my wife's pregnancy, and her attempt to deceive me into believing the child was mine. I held nothing back, laying out the unvarnished truth about the situation. I confessed that I had let many things slide over the years, enduring more than I cared to discuss. But this was a breaking point. I couldn't allow her actions to go unaddressed. She displayed clear signs of being a psychopath. Enough is enough. I've reached my limit. I'm considering getting a divorce. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention. The butcher is planning to marry the other woman he was involved with. I don't believe your mother is aware of this, though. While I was speaking, my wife had been listening from the other room. It appeared she wasn't aware of the butcher's plan to marry the other woman. In response, she promptly dialed him, and I overheard her saying, "You promised we'd be together. We agreed to start our life after the baby's born and I get divorced. What happened to that?" She shamelessly aired all of this in front of my daughter-in-law. At least now the truth was out in the open. My wife and I ended up divorcing not long afterward. Several months down the line, she gave birth to the baby. Rumor has it that the butcher never actually ended his relationship with the other woman. This led to a massive confrontation between him and my wife. He strung her along, making her believe they'd build a new life together once the baby arrived. But the reality was different. At 50 years old, she was left divorced with a newborn and no support. She was at a loss about what to do next. When someone settles into their life, they usually find contentment with what they have. However, my wife took a different path. She tried to exert control over everyone, acted selfishly, and followed her own desires. And this is where it all led. In recent times, I've been spending my days with my adorable grandson. I'm living modestly off the retirement savings I had accumulated. Additionally, I've initiated legal action against the butcher for having an affair with my wife, which led to our divorce. It shouldn't be too long before I receive compensation for his actions. I plan on looking after my grandson until he's old enough for preschool. After that, I'm thinking of finding a new partner, someone with whom I can travel, enjoy delicious meals, and make the most of my time. I want to thank you for sticking with my story till the end. I hope all of you are leading happy and healthy lives.